Kaiju, some of the biggest, baddest monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh!, and even though they're extremely well known and have made their way into multiple decks, they don't really make a good deck on their own. So Kaiju monsters all have more or less the same summoning conditions. You can special summon one of them to your opponent's field by attributing a monster they control, and then are able to special summon one to your field if your opponent controls a Kaiju. Each player can only control one Kaiju monster. The purpose of these monsters is to simulate a battle between two giant monsters as a nod to Kaiju movies. As a TCG exclusive archetype, the rollout for them was pretty gradual. In Clash of Rebellion, we were introduced to Dogoran the Mad Flame Kaiju, Kumungus the Sticky String Kaiju, and Kyoto Tower Waterfront. With only these three cards, the archetype wasn't really all that developed. Aside from just summoning big monsters onto each side of the field, the other focus of the deck was to accumulate Kaiju counters onto the field spell that could be used to pay for the monster's effects, which we see built upon in future cards. But for now the question became, how are you even supposed to play these cards? Early builds of Kaiju decks started focusing on the idea that you could get rid of one of your opponent's monsters to summon your own Kaiju to their field, and then take control of it through cards like Owner Seal and Remove Brainwashing, which return monsters to their original owners. And it's funny that this actually caused these cards to jump in price just a little because they were old and almost nobody had them. But the promise of a new deck got them back into circulation. Aside from just these cards, people played around with ninja variants. Because with there being only two Kaiju monsters, a core of Hanzo and the Ninjutsu Art of Transformation trap cards made them easier to get into rotation. Needless to say, the deck didn't do a whole lot. A few months later, with the release of Dimension of Chaos, we would receive Radiant, the multi-dimensional Kaiju, Gameciel the Sea Turtle Kaiju, and Kaiju Capture Mission. While these added some new members and tricks to the deck, the rise of the Greydol archetype in the same booster set made things pretty interesting. So Greydols are an archetype of aqua monsters that can take control of the opponent's monsters when they're destroyed. So if you wanted to play a deck centered around Kaiju, it made the most sense to just combine it with Greydols rather than focusing on outdated spells and traps. But most importantly, with Gameciel making its debut, the thought around these cards began to change. Coming in at only 2,200 attack points, this is the weakest of the Kaiju. It became pretty clear that the best course of action would be to use this monster as a form of removal. Splashing it into other decks as the sole Kaiju meant that this was a one card out to an indestructible monster on the other side of the field. Since tributing the monster is part of the summoning cost and very few cards actually prevent the act of tributing, there was no way to respond until the monster was already summoned. And when Breakers of Shadow gave us Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, it only got better. This is a spell card that destroys all monsters on the field, then summons two Kaiju from your deck. One for you and one for your opponent. Also, they can't change battle positions and must attack if able. This was the perfect way to set up the big monster battle rather than having to draw into what you're looking for. It also has the added effect that you can banish it from the graveyard to search your deck for any one Kaiju monster. Since the thought was already there to play Gameciel as a form of individual removal, why not add this card and one other stronger Kaiju as a form of optional mass removal and search power as well? The Kaiju package, as it was called, quickly became an answer for pesky monsters. While this meant that playing an entire deck dedicated to only this archetype was now obsolete, I see it as a victory because at the end of the day, people were still using the cards to set up a big battle between behemoths. Oh nice, I needed that achievement on this channel. As the years went on, people would continue playing a variation of these cards in their decks, even getting Interrupted Kaiju Slumber on the limited list. Eventually, the optimal lineup became only two Gameciel, but the impact it made couldn't be understated. And it wasn't only the Sea Turtle that saw play. Monsters like Adarla the Mystery Dust Kaiju were also attractive options when the Windlock strategies became popular with Barry's Statue of the Stormwinds. And for strategies that required your opponent to have a really big monster on the field because you needed to use their attack against them, we later got Thunder King, the Lightning Strike Kaiju with an impressive 3,300 attack points. I always thought Kaiju was pretty interesting, and I'm glad they didn't just fade away like some other TCG archetypes, but didn't completely dominate things in a terrible way. And while I think it was great they found their niche in terms of usefulness, being great additions to most any kind of deck, I do wish they would have taken off as their own dedicated archetype. They're just too slow because sure, you can give your opponent the weak monster and give yourself the stronger or more useful one, while utilizing the counters accumulated to your advantage. But all things considered, there were just better strategies that take less time to set up and leave more powerful end boards, as individual cards are still potentially some of the strongest when used as counters to indestructible monsters, which is still really cool. And aesthetically, I really love them taking influence from various Kaiju monsters, some of them being very obvious what they're inspired by, but most of them being pretty unique in their final execution. You know, if we're talking about archetypes and monsters that we'd actually like to see some kind of lore or anime or spin-off for, then I really do want to see more about Kaiju. I think it could be pretty neat just kind of of tackling this as maybe like a one-off kind of story in some sense, just because I think they had a really neat impact on Yu-Gi-Oh! And would love to see more of them. So let me know what you think about the Kaiju monsters in the comments below, and which one is your favorite. I'm a pretty big fan of Gameciel because it is just a big blue turtle guy, and I like that idea. But I do also really like Thunder King as myself. I play Gustos, and it's a pretty funny strategy if you do that with Freeze. But then again, the classic big dinosaur Dogoran is also really cool, and again, being the first one ever, it has a special place in my heart. Anyway, this is Gatorax, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all later.